Have you ever found yourself trapped in traffic, gripping the steering wheel until your knuckles turn white, as if your frustration could somehow part the sea of cars ahead of you? Have you ever poured your heart into a relationship or a project at work, only to watch it collapse despite every ounce of effort you gave? Or maybe, like millions of us, you felt the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic when life, as you knew it, stopped overnight, and no amount of wishing, worrying, or raging could bring back the old normal. In those moments, we come face to face with a truth most of us spend our lives trying to avoid. So much of life is out of our control. And yet, here's the paradox. The more we fight what we cannot change, the more we suffer. Anger doesn't clear the road. Wishing doesn't erase illness. Resentment doesn't bring back lost time. What if, instead of fighting the immovable, we learn to align ourselves with reality? What if the real strength lies not in resistance, but in acceptance? This video is about the art of acceptance, an ancient idea. And ordinary people every day discover that when they stop wasting energy on the impossible, they uncover a deeper kind of freedom. But acceptance is not easy. It feels like giving up and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you'd like to go even further, YouTube now offers a way to donate directly through Super Thanks. Your support doesn't just help me create more content. It helps spread these timeless ideas to more people who are searching for peace in a chaotic world. So take a second now, hit like, subscribe, share, and if you feel moved, tap that Super Thanks button. It makes all the difference. Now, let's begin the journey into acceptance, not as surrender, but as the strongest way of living. Life rarely goes exactly the way we want it to. There are countless moments when things unfold beyond our control, and our natural response is often anger, frustration, or even despair. Think about it for a second. Have you ever been stuck in traffic on a morning when you were already late for an important meeting? You grip the steering wheel, your heartbeat quickens, your mind floods with irritation, and yet no amount of anger makes the cars move faster. Or imagine planning a long-awaited picnic, only to wake up to a sky pouring down rain. Maybe you've experienced a sudden illness that derailed months of preparation or hard work. These are the kinds of everyday realities that reveal a simple truth. No matter how much we plan, what happens instead is that we waste energy that could be directed elsewhere on emotions that leave us drained, bitter, and powerless. This is where the idea of acceptance begins to shine. The difference between their experiences isn't in the external world, it's in the mindset. Philosophers throughout history have recognized this truth. The Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, emphasize that some things are within our control, our thoughts, our actions, our responses, and some things are not. Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This is the essence of acceptance. Marcus Aurelius, as Emperor of Rome, dealt with wars, plagues, and betrayals. And yet in his private writings, he continually reminded himself that he could not control the events of the universe, only the way he met them. Across the world, in a different tradition, a person might dedicate years to a job only to be laid off during an economic downturn. Rage at the company, at the economy, or at fate itself may be natural, but it doesn't bring back the job. What it does do is prolong the suffering. Acceptance, in this case, looks like acknowledging the loss, feeling the disappointment, but then turning that energy toward finding new opportunities. Many entrepreneurs who built great companies began with failure they could not prevent, but what set them apart was their willingness to accept reality quickly and move on, instead of being paralyzed by resentment. Even in the grand scale of life, this art of acceptance holds power. None of us can change the passage of time. We grow older, our bodies change. Instead of being consumed by frustration at events you cannot alter, you invest your energy where it truly matters, in your own character and response. Marcus Aurelius: if instead you accept the situation and focus on what you can do, update your resume, learn new skills, reach out to contacts you reclaim agency in a situation that otherwise feels powerless. Turning eastward, Buddhism offers another lens on the art of acceptance. At its core lies the concept of impermanence, or anicca. everything changes. Health fades, seasons turn, relationships shift, bodies age. To cling to permanence in a world that is constantly in flux is to set yourself up for suffering. Imagine someone who insists that a relationship will never change, that their youth will never fade, or that fortune will always smile upon them, when reality proves otherwise, as it inevitably will. They are shattered. The Buddhist teaching is not meant to be pessimistic, but liberating. By accepting impermanence, by realizing that nothing lasts forever, we can stop clinging so desperately and instead appreciate things for what they are when they are. Alongside impermanence comes the doctrine of dependent origination, or Pratitya the idea that everything arises in connection with everything else. Nothing exists in isolation, and because everything is interdependent, much is beyond our personal control. Taoism's vision is not about passivity, but about alignment. Just as a skilled surfer doesn't fight the ocean, but rides the wave, a wise person doesn't fight life, but moves with its rhythm. When we compare these three traditions, Stoicism, Buddhism, and Taoism, we notice striking similarities despite their cultural differences. All of them teach that clinging, resistance, and rage at the unchangeable are forms of self-inflicted suffering. All of them direct us back to our inner freedom. The Stoics to our judgment, Buddhists to mindfulness of impermanence, but of the water that wears the wall down. Modern psychology has begun to echo these ancient insights. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most effective modern therapeutic approaches, is heavily influenced by Stoicism. It teaches patients to distinguish between thoughts they can change and external events they cannot. Mindfulness meditation, rooted in Buddhism, but our inner world is always ours to shape. The Stoic reminds us to focus on our judgments. The Buddhist reminds us to release our clinging, and the Taoist reminds us to flow like water. Together, they paint a vision of acceptance that is not defeat, but empowerment. By aligning ourselves with reality instead of fighting it, we find a peace that circumstances cannot take away. Human beings have an instinctive desire to control their environment. From the moment we are children, we learn that when we cry, someone comes to feed us. When we reach for a toy, we can grasp it. That early sense of influence over the world gives us comfort. As we grow older, this desire for control becomes more sophisticated but never disappears. We want our careers to unfold according to plan, our relationships to last, our health to remain strong, our commute to be smooth, our technology to work perfectly. Control gives us the illusion of safety, and safety calms our anxieties. When life goes according to our expectations, we feel stable, competent, and reassured that the universe is predictable. If a predator appeared, our ancestors needed an immediate surge of energy to fight or to flee. Adrenaline spiked, the heart raced, muscles tightened, and the brain narrowed its focus to the threat at hand. This system kept our species alive, but in modern life, it often misfires. A delayed flight, a traffic jam, or a harsh email from a boss isn't life-threatening, yet our bodies react as though it were. The heart pounds, frustration builds, and we feel compelled to act, even if the situation is completely outside our control. The biology of survival doesn't distinguish between a tiger in the bushes and a plane stuck on the runway. We live in an age where uncertainty seems to multiply. Technological shifts redefine entire industries. Relationships often change in unpredictable ways. And global crises remind us just how little control we truly have. The art of acceptance becomes not only a path to peace of mind, but also a survival skill. Consider the workplace first. Projects fail, teams fall apart, companies collapse despite the best intentions and most meticulous planning. When a project you have invested months or even years in comes crashing down, the emphasis is not on pretending failure never happened, but on accepting it as part of the process. When a startup goes under, one founder might collapse into bitterness, but another might take the lessons, pivot to a new idea, and eventually succeed. The second path is the art of acceptance applied directly to professional life. In personal relationships, social media comparisons, and health anxieties, Many of these pressures cannot be eliminated. You cannot control every boss, every economic downturn, every unexpected bill, or every health scare. What you can control is how you relate to these stressors. People who demand that everything go perfectly live in constant tension because perfection never comes. People who accept that stress is inevitable, but choose to manage it constructively through rest, exercise, or mindful practices suffer less. Stress itself may not vanish, but the way it affects your mind and body changes dramatically when you shift from resistance to acceptance. Economic crises further highlight the point. Think of the 2008 financial collapse or more recent downturns. Millions lost homes, jobs, and savings. Many individuals could do nothing to stop the larger economic forces at play. Some collapsed under the weight of anger at the government, at corporations, or at fate itself. Others accepted the painful reality and recalibrated, downsizing, retraining, finding creative solutions. The world is full of examples of people who built new lives after losing everything, not because they ignored the devastation, but because they refused to waste their limited energy railing against forces too large to control. They accepted the situation and focused on the small steps they could take within it. Health challenges are perhaps the most personal test of acceptance. A sudden diagnosis of chronic illness or the reality of aging can easily trigger anger, fear, and denial. Why me? Why now? These questions are natural, but they rarely lead to peace. Acceptance does not mean celebrating illness. It means facing it directly and choosing how to respond. Some people spend their remaining years resenting the cards they have been dealt, while others use the same time to deepen relationships, savor daily joys, and even inspire others. Stories of individuals who face terminal illness with grace remind us that acceptance can transform even the harshest realities into sources of wisdom and courage. The metaphor of adjusting the sails when the wind changes captures the essence of all these examples. You cannot change the wind itself, whether it is the failure of a project, the end of a relationship, a global pandemic, an economic collapse, or a health crisis. The wind blows as it will, but you can always change the sails. You can shift your perspective, redirect your energy, and choose actions that carry you forward rather than leave you stuck. This is not passive resignation. It is active adaptation. It is resilience born from the humility of knowing that control is limited, but freedom lies in how you respond. Seen this way, the art of acceptance in modern life is not about giving up. It is about living more effectively in a world that will never bend fully to our will. It is about saving your strength for what can be changed and releasing the futile struggle against what cannot. Those who master it are not weaker. They're stronger, calmer, and more capable of thriving no matter what comes. In an age of uncertainty, that might be the most valuable skill of all. Marcus Aurelius is one of the clearest demonstrations that acceptance is not passivity, but disciplined engagement with reality. He grew up in privilege, and yet spent many of his years not in palaces, but in military tents along the Danube. Writing to himself about the right use of the present moment while epidemics and invasions pressed in on the empire. The Antonine Plague devastated Roman cities, trade routes were unstable, and politics inside the court were treacherous. There was no lever he could pull to halt a disease or guarantee loyalty in distant provinces. Whether consciously or not, is following Marcus's playbook. Accept what is fixed, work what is malleable, keep your dignity. His calm is not denial, it is discipline. There's also a moral dimension to the acceptance Marcus practiced. Acceptance did not shrink his sense of duty, it expanded it, knowing that he could not engineer a painless world. He chose to be useful within an imperfect one. He chose to make justice a lived reality in small, repeatable actions rather than a fantasy deferred until conditions were perfect. Even his reflections on mortality, so often misunderstood as grim, were instruments of clarity. If time is short, there is even less reason to squander it on rage at what cannot be reversed. Anger at the existence of winter does not warm a soldier. Building the fire does. Anger at slander does not restore your reputation. Living in a way that contradicts it does. Seen through this lens, acceptance is not a retreat from action, but a purifying filter that removes self-defeating motions from the field. For Marcus Aurelius, it is a short, illuminating step to Nelson Mandela. If Marcus shows acceptance under imperial responsibility, Mandela shows acceptance under captivity that would have broken most people. 27 years in prison is not an inconvenience. He accepted the limits on his movement while expanding the scope of his mind, studying, thinking, listening, and understanding his jailers as human beings shaped by a system as much as his fellow prisoners were. He accepted that he could not rewrite the past, but he could write a different future if he survived with his judgment intact. That internal choice set up everything that followed. After release, he could have responded to decades of abuse with vengeance, and many would have cheered. Instead, he practiced a more radical version of acceptance. He accepted that a multiracial nation could not be built by the punishment of half its population. It had to be built by drawing them into a shared moral project. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was not naivete. It was acceptance deployed as national strategy. South Africa could not prosecute every crime without tearing itself apart. He recognized that millions of fellow citizens experienced those symbols as identity and pride. Humiliating them would win a day of catharsis and lose a generation. Acceptance asked, what is the wind as it actually blows here? And how do we set the sails for unity? Some will argue this romanticizes suffering or glosses over the need for resistance. It is not. Acceptance does not ask the oppressed to love oppression. It asks them to refuse the mental terms imposed by the oppressor. In Mandela's case, acceptance drained hatred of its fuel. He acknowledged irreducible facts: years lost, loved ones buried, a body aged by labor, and then refused to donate one more hour of his mind to bitterness. He conceded the existence of the storm and built a vessel that could carry a nation through it. The difference in outcome is measurable. Societies that deny their pasts rot from within. Leaders who pretend they can undo yesterday by sheer fury inherit ashes. He accepted what could not be changed and turned energy toward the urgent work of building institutions that might prevent such a past from returning. Grand figures show the architecture of acceptance at a heroic scale, but the most decisive tests come in ordinary rooms where no historian will ever visit. Consider a daughter becoming the primary caregiver for a parent with Alzheimer's. At first, she fights the erosion of memory like a personal insult from the universe, correcting, arguing, begging the mind she knew to come back. Every mistake feels like a defeat, every lost name like a betrayal. Her blood pressure spikes, guilt and anger swirl. Nothing improves. Then she reframes the situation. She accepts the disease's course without pretending it is fair. Acceptance allows her to redirect energy from argument to design. She childproofs the house for an adult, structures the day with routines that soothe, labels cabinets, puts favorite music on in the afternoon when restlessness rises. She pairs every visit to the doctor with a small pleasure ice cream afterward, a short walk where sunlight can do its steady work. She accepts that she cannot restore old conversations, and so she looks for new kinds of presents: holding hands, folding towels together, watching birds of the feeder. The disease does not stop, but life ceases to be a daily riot. She is less exhausted, not because the work is lighter, but because acceptance removed the burden of a fight she could never win. Then bargaining with the body as if fury could regenerate tissue. But biology answers on its own schedule. Acceptance does not deny the grief of a season ending. It directs the competitor's fire into healing and leadership. He becomes the most prepared observer on the bench, studies film not to fuel regret, but to give real-time feedback to teammates. The grace you show yourself in that chapter seeds a different kind of love later, one built by a person who does not confuse clinging with devotion. But their world expands because they're no longer pretending the disease behaves according to their wishes. They regain credibility with themselves. Acceptance even has a place in grief. The caregiver does not accept that a parent's mind should fail. She accepts that it has, and then protects the remaining joys with fierce tenderness. Acceptance is not surrender. It is the end of fantasy as a strategy. Another objection: doesn't acceptance kill ambition? If anything, it rescues ambition from delusion. The entrepreneur who accepts that most startups fail does not dream less. She designs milestones, cash buffers, and plan Bs that give the dream a chance to survive contact with reality. The student who accepts he will not ace every exam does not study less. He builds a sustainable schedule and asks for help earlier. The activist who accepts that institutions change slowly does not care less. She learns how budgets, committees, and laws actually move. And she wins more than the person who mistakes public fury for policy. Ambition without acceptance is a sugar high. Ambition with acceptance is endurance. Acceptance has techniques. None are dramatic. Jaw cuts the feedback loop where a clenched muscle convinces the mind that catastrophe is present, designing your environment so that the default choice is the wise, one healthy food visible. Phone on Do Not Disturb while you work. Supportive people scheduled into your week acknowledges that you're not a pure while floating above circumstances. Practicing gratitude, not as a performance, but as a search for accurate data, reminds the mind that even on bad days, not everything is bad. Each technique is a way of shifting weight from complaint to construction. What unites Marcus in his tent, Mandela in his cell, and ordinary people in kitchens and clinics is not superhuman temperament, but a quiet agreement with reality. They agree that the wind will blow as it pleases. Anger at the unchangeable is friction, and friction generates heat, but no movement. Acceptance reduces friction and converts fuel into motion. That is why the caregiver grows more skillful, the owner more inventive, the athlete more strategic, the grieving friend more tender, the citizen more effective. The world remains imperfect. The wind keeps shifting, but the person is no longer dragged behind events like a net. They become a sailor again, hands on the rope, eyes on the horizon, aware of limits, and therefore newly free within them. Life has a way of reminding us, sometimes gently and sometimes brutally, that we are not in charge of everything. No matter how carefully we plan, no matter how disciplined or talented we may be, there will always be factors outside our control, illnesses that arrive without warning, economic downturns that erase years of hard work, relationships that fade despite our efforts. A person steps out of the quicksand of resentment and onto solid ground where growth is possible. Or consider the stress of losing a job. The immediate instinct might be to rage at unfairness, exploring opportunities that might not have been visible before. The acceptance is not a denial of loss. It is the starting point for a new chapter. Without it, the person drowns in bitterness. With it, they reclaim agency. The strength of acceptance becomes even clearer in the face of illness. Someone diagnosed with a chronic condition has two paths. One path is endless protest. Why me? But because they stop wasting precious time on futile fights and instead invest in what remains possible. They cook healthier meals, nurture meaningful relationships, savor small joys, and, in doing so, often experience a deeper sense of fulfillment than when they were healthy but distracted. Acceptance also protects us from burning out in larger collective crises. When the COVID-19 pandemic struck, the difference between those who clung to denial or rage and those who accepted and adapted became stark. The virus did not vanish because of anger, nor did it respect wishes. The people who fared better were those who accepted the reality quickly and asked, given this, how can I still live with purpose? They learned new ways of working. Write down 3 things you're angry about right now that you cannot change. Maybe it is a mistake you made years ago, a person who treated you unfairly, or a global situation far bigger than you. Then, beside each, write one small action you can take today that is within your control. Perhaps you cannot change the mistake, but you can choose to forgive yourself and apply the lesson. Donating or educating yourself. This exercise is the art of acceptance in practice, naming what cannot be altered and then refusing to let it dominate your emotional landscape. The task is not to eliminate those situations, but to refine our response to them. The choice is always before us, to resist in vain or to accept and act wisely. If we choose acceptance, we discover a life that is calmer, stronger, and more deeply free. And remember this closing truth: real freedom is not in controlling the world, it is in controlling your response to the world. The wind will always shift. The question is not whether it will blow your way, but how you will set your sails. That decision, always and forever, is yours.